All right, I wanted to come back to these open ocean notes just to make sure that we've covered everything. So, in your notes, you are missing the word largest area of the marine ecosystem. Remembering that marine is talking about water. It reaches from the coasts to the middle of the ocean, so coast and middle. And next is the living things that survive in the open ocean need to have a way to float or swim. So it's living things that survive in the open ocean need to have a way to float or swim. The next bullet point reads animals, protists, plants, and bacteria that float or drift in ocean water are called plankton. So that's that second bullet point down for your notes. They are moved around the open ocean by surface currents and wind. So those two have a lot of blank spaces. If you need to pause the video to fill those in, now would be a great pausing point. Next, down to that third bullet point on your notes, it's called phytoplankton. And those are types of plankton that do photosynthesis, which would be making their own food from the sunlight. And this is the beginning of food chains. So phytoplankton are types of plankton that do photosynthesis, and these are the beginning of the food chains. Moving on down, in the open ocean, there are many types of swimmers. So swimmers, and these would include fish, whales, and sharks. Some fish, this is looking at the fifth bullet point down. Some fish, such as the herring and tuna, swim in schools, which would be groups of fish, while others swim alone. And then the last bullet point here for your open ocean notes, some animals have other ways of moving besides swimming. And it gives you some examples there on the slide. Again, if you would like to pause to fill in your notes, you can always do that. Moving on to the deep ocean. So the deep ocean is very cold, under high pressure, and always dark because sunlight cannot get down that far. That is your very first bullet point there. Next bullet point is less life can survive in the deep ocean. So less life can survive in the deep ocean. And then last bullet point on this note page, for some animals, food comes from the bodies of dead fish, dead plankton, and even dead whales that rain down from the open ocean waters above. Again, if you would like to pause for the deep ocean, you may do so. All right, here is a map of the wetlands in the United States. We're going to be focusing specifically on the saltwater marshes, so those that are up right against the oceans. We're looking at saltwater marshes. And this is a good example of a saltwater marsh. And then here is another example, just kind of showing you how the tidal zone comes down and down and down. And then you've got the marshy area here in the middle. And then you've got the low marsh, the mud flat, and then this part is always submerged. We don't need to necessarily know these titles, but it's just a good representation to show you the thickness of the crust of the earth when you're looking at the difference between the marshland and then the regular upland. All right, so saltwater marsh, this is where your notes begin. So these are coastal wetlands and they are flooded and drained by salt water that has been brought in by the tides. They're marshy because the soil may be composed of the deep mud and peat. So peat is made of decomposing plant matter that's often several feet thick. We normally just call this mud, but the technical term is peat. It is waterlogged, meaning it's constantly full of water, root-filled, and very spongy. Because these salt marshes are frequently submerged by the tides, meaning they're underwater, and they contain a lot of decomposing plant material, the oxygen levels in the peat can be extremely low, which is a condition called hypoxia. Hypoxia is caused by the growth of bacteria, which produce the sulfurous, rotten egg smell that is often associated with marshes and mud flats. These salt marshes, they do occur worldwide, but particularly in middle to high latitudes, meaning that they are not extremely close to the equator. Thriving along the protected shorelines, they are a common habitat in estuaries, which we'll talk about next. And then in the United States, salt marshes can be found on every coast, and approximately half of the nation's salt marshes are located along the Gulf Coast, which we saw at the map at the beginning. All right, so these intertidal habitats are essential for healthy fisheries, coastlines, and communities, and they are an integral part of our economy and culture. They do provide essential food, refuge, or nursery habitats for more than 75% of fisheries species, including shrimp, blue crab, and many finfish. These marshes also protect the shorelines from erosion, which is the wearing away, by buffering the wave action and trapping the sediments. They reduce the flooding by slowing and absorbing rainwater and protect water quality by filtering runoff and metabolizing excess nutrients. So they take care of a lot of things. Alrighty, this is the first line in your notes. So saltwater marshes, they are affected by the ocean's tides. They only contain salt water. And then the tides have the opposite effect from the ocean shore. So when it's low ocean tides, meaning the tide on the shore is low, the marsh area floods and brings in the higher water. So low ocean tides, the marsh floods, and this is when you would be able to canoe around the area. And of course, the opposite, when it's high ocean tides or the water is higher up on the shore, that's when the marsh drains. So high ocean tides, the marsh drains, which means it's going to be lower water. And that's when you would be able to walk around and see the grasses. All right, peat is the mud in a salt marsh, and that's that nutrient-rich soil. And then hypoxia is when oxygen levels in the peat get extremely low and produce a rotten egg smell. And the different animals include the crabs, the shrimp, and lots of different types of fish. All right, coming up on the estuary, this is not a very common term, but we see this on the coast quite frequently. What an estuary means is you have fresh water, so this is a river, and it comes down to meet the salt water. So you can see how the fresh water has this bluish color, the bright blue, and then the salt water has the dark blue color. So it's when this fresh water is mixing with the salt water. So estuaries and their surrounding wetlands are bodies of water that are usually found where rivers meet the sea, and it creates what we call brackish water, which is when fresh and salt water mix together. Estuaries are among the most productive ecosystems in the world, and many animals rely on estuaries for food, places to breed, and migration stopovers, meaning when they're migrating somewhere, they would stop in this area. So unlike plants, which typically live their whole lives rooted to one spot, many animals that live in these estuaries must change their behavior according to the water's salinity or the salt level in order to survive. There's often a different amount of fresh water coming in, or depending on if the tides are high and coming in, or if it's flooding, or there are a lot of different things that can change the salinity of the water. So the plants and animals that live in these estuaries, they can tolerate a wide range of salinities, and they're called euryhalines. Estuaries are home to very unique plant and animal communities, and they have adapted to that brackish water, that mixture of the fresh water draining from the land, going back to the salty seawater. Examples of the euryhaline animals would include oysters and crabs. And that's the end of this ecosystems presentation. You also have in your packet the vocabulary to either cut out and match in your notebook, or if you would like to color code them, or put them on front and back of flashcards. There's a lot of vocabulary involved with this unit. So you can choose how to use that vocabulary as long as you are manipulating it in some way to be able to practice that. I'll see you guys soon for the next presentation.